So sorry, I didn't leave so abruptly there when I first saw you.
Really?
It's good to see you.
Hey. How you doing? Good?
Just quickly, I know you brought a present. I didn't see your course on just pretty honest course.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Maybe I need to. I'll reach back out to the Honors College for some of Thanks. All right, everyone, if you can please take your seats, we're going to get started.
Last time that I saw you, went down on that
Nice meeting you. Good on yourself?
You're going to like
Yeah, I'm one of the elements
All right, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you guys so much for coming. It's great to see some familiar faces and some folks who I don't know. My name is Leland Lazarus. I'm the Associate Director at the Jack Gordon Institute for Public Policy at Florida International University. So hello to everybody here physically and then those who are watching on YouTube. To give you a little bit of background, for those who don't know about the Gordon Institute, we're basically a think tank that is connected to FIU, and we focus on everything from national security and international relations to cybersecurity to even a robust intelligence program, which some of the folks in the audience here are a part of, where students intern for and eventually work for various intelligence agencies here in DC. You guys actually presented in DC a couple weeks ago, so representing FIU here in DC. That's absolutely amazing. So we're going to first spend the first couple minutes to give an overview of this paper called LAC Goes Global, Allies and Partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. But first I want to start off with a story. Over the past year and actually several years, whether it be U.S. government agencies, think tanks, NGOs, everyone is increasingly focused on the U.S.-China competition in the global south, and specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean, right? But all throughout 2023, my colleague Robbie and I, we were looking at the headlines, we were looking at various government documents and press releases, and we were finding out that, well, Vice President of Colombia, Francia Marquez, she visited Africa, right? 3 countries in Africa. The EU President, Ursula von der Leyen, she visited Latin America and the Caribbean, and she announced the 45 billion euro renewable energy project for Latin America and the Caribbean. The Prime Minister of South Korea, Han Duck-soo, visited the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, for the 50th anniversary of CARICOM. And so other allies and partners are also developing a very robust relationship in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we're just not sure whether the U.S. is really leveraging those kinds of partnerships in order to make sure that we're pooling resources on projects that can really help our partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. So what we did over several months was basically to look through press releases, policy documents, strategic documents that various countries have for the region to really distill the priorities that each country, each region has in Latin America and the Caribbean, and identify areas in which the U.S. can partner with our allies and partners in this region. So the first is Africa. And of course we know that Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean are connected by the horrible history of colonialism and slavery, right? About 12 to 20 million African slaves were brought over to the New World, many in Brazil, many in Colombia. I'm Panamanian American, and so my sort of family roots come from that. But recently, there has been a push on the part of leaders and civil society representatives to further foster the Africa, Latin America, Caribbean relationship. As I mentioned before, Vice President Francia Marquez of Colombia, in May, she visited South Africa, Kenya, and Ethiopia. where she was really strengthening the Colombia-Africa Partnership 2022-2026, in which she wants to boost trade between Colombia and various African countries. She also specifically chose those three countries because they all have a history of reconciliation from various wars and conflicts. And so as the Petri administration in Colombia is thinking through negotiation with ELN and the total peace, Francia Marquez was trying to learn some lessons from some African partners on that. Another key leader in the region is Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados. And she has really led the effort in terms of trying to boost Caribbean and African trade. Right now, that trade is quite low. It's about $1 billion. Of course, sending products from Africa to the Caribbean is actually quite expensive. And so there's been negotiation on multiple things, dropping tariffs, providing visa-free travel for African business people and Caribbean business people in order to facilitate those connections. She also connected or created a CARICOM representative office in the African Union, and she's spoken several times at the African Union conferences. This was the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, who visited Trinidad and Tobago back in July during the 50th anniversary of the CARICOM conference. And again, this is another example of this budding relationship. Just a couple weeks ago, Lula da Silva of Brazil, he visited Egypt and Ethiopia in order to really boost trade with those countries as well. And then, of course, as we know, the Kenyan government has agreed to lead the multinational force in Haiti that has been sort of postponed for now because they said that they wouldn't necessarily send a force until there's a transitional government in place in Haiti. Next is Australia. And you would think, Australia is so far away from Latin America and the Caribbean. Why in the world would they have any sort of trade or investment or relations with this region? In fact, it's actually quite robust. And the reason for that is, Corey, we were talking about it just before, the CPTPP, right? So, of course, Australia is a part of CPTPP. So is Peru and Chile and Mexico. And so the idea is that over the next decade, Australian beef, red meat, goat meat, you name it, tariffs to Latin America and the Caribbean, specifically Mexico, is going to decrease from 25% to 0 over the next decade. So you're going to see an increase of Australian beef exports to the region in the coming years. Another is critical minerals, specifically lithium, right? Australia is a direct competitor for the lithium triangle, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. But in addition to competition, we think that Australia can also provide technical assistance, knowledge transfer of sort of better ways to extract lithium and not have it be so water intensive. That's a potential area for collaboration. And then also the Australia, Latin America, and Caribbean Business Council has a pretty robust program throughout the region. They also do various cultural events and public diplomacy activities as well. Next is India, right? The world's largest country based on population, but it also has a very robust relationship with Caribbean countries, right? Latin American Caribbean countries because of the history. You think Guyana, you think Trinidad and Tobago, you think Grenada. They have a really robust Indian diaspora population that is also very influential politically. And so last year, the foreign minister of India, Jai Shankar, he visited various Latin American and Caribbean countries, Dominican Republic, Guyana, Panama, in order to boost trade. He wants to basically double trade. Right now it's $50 billion. He wants to double it to $100 billion by the end of the decade. Mexico is the second largest importer of Indian cars. And India has also been setting up various consulates and embassies in various Latin American and Caribbean countries recently. Of all of the countries that we focused on in our report, I would say that Japan by far has the most robust relationship throughout the region. A lot of that has to do with the history, right? The fact that the largest Japanese diaspora outside of Japan is in Brazil. The fact that there's also a sizable Japanese population in Peru, right? Alberto Fujimori was of Japanese descent. But also, there are two other organizations that I want to focus on, which is the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, right, which is similar to our USAID, and also the Japanese Bank for International Cooperation, the JBIC, which is similar to our Development Finance Corporation, DFC. Both of those organizations support various development assistance projects throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, from supporting renewable energy projects in Peru to even supporting math and science classes to rural children in Guatemala. So it's actually quite robust, and I think is also an area for potential collaboration in the future. New Zealand. New Zealand is also another one that's extremely far away. Why would they have anything to do with Latin America and the Caribbean? But if you actually read its Latin America strategy document, you find out that New Zealand has a lot, or thinks that it has a lot in common with small island developing states, specifically in the Caribbean. Think climate change issues, rising sea levels, right? And so in its strategic document, New Zealand focused specifically on ways in which they can provide technology transfer and knowledge in terms of renewable energy projects and things like that for the Eastern Caribbean in particular. I think that's really important because, of course, the U.S., we don't really have that many embassies in the Eastern Caribbean. We have just Barbados that is supposed to basically be the representative for 7 different Eastern Caribbean countries. That's been a huge sore point for our Eastern Caribbean allies or partners for a long time. So maybe partnering with New Zealand would be helpful in that regard. South Korea. South Korea is important historically because, for example, Colombian forces were sent over to Korea during the Korean War. And that has actually caused good positive relations between Colombia, South Korea, and South Korea's image in Latin America and the Caribbean in general. We also know that folks love, especially young people in Latin America and the Caribbean, they love BTS and Blackpink and Squid Game. And so South Korea's public diplomacy is pretty on point. Their soft power is really on point. But one other thing I wanted to highlight is that they also have a USAID equivalent, right, called KOICA, right, the Korean International Cooperation Agency. And just like what I explained with JICA, KOICA also does various development assistance programs throughout the region as well, stuff that we don't necessarily know about because it's not necessarily reported as often in the news, but also very, very important. They also have annual meetings with the Inter-American Development Bank. They are negotiating a agreement with Mercosur in order to increase their trade and investment. And various companies also play a pretty active role. One specifically is POSCO. It's a very big sort of mining South Korean company, and they bought a $4 billion lithium mine in Hombre Muerto in Argentina. So South Korea is a pretty big player in the critical mineral and lithium market. And last but not least, on my end, before I give the floor to Robbie, is Taiwan. I see a lot of colleagues here from the German Marshall Fund program. We just came back from Taiwan after a 2-week trip a couple weeks ago. And of the 12 governments left in the world that recognize Taiwan, 7 of them are in Latin America and the Caribbean. So diplomatically, this region is very important for Taiwan. You've seen an increase in Taiwanese exports to the region, about a 60% increase over the past 2 years. But I also want to focus on these two agencies, the International Cooperation Development Fund, ICDF, just like the RUSAID, and the OECD, the Overseas Investment Development Corporation, like our DFC. Both of them are engaged in agricultural assistance programs. This is one that's happening in Guatemala, in St. Lucia. And then OIDC provided $200 million in order to build a national hospital in a place called Chimaltenango in Guatemala. This was at the height of COVID. It took about 18 months to stand this 350-bed hospital. It came just in the nick of time and saved lives in Guatemala. And this is a picture of President Tsai Ing-wen visiting Guatemala last year, where she visited the hospital.
Next up, we have the European Union. The European Union has a very strong relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean, with links due to deep historical, cultural, and economic ties, mainly due to Spain and Portugal. It's also a large provider of official development assistance to the region to the tune of over $3 billion. Further highlighting this deep relationship is the EU LAC Global Investment Agenda, created in March of 2023 to address infrastructure needs in Latin America and the Caribbean. One specific project, like Australia and many other countries in the region, is a critical minerals project, and that's basically is created to help strengthen the sustainable supply chains in the region. Next up is the United Kingdom. Specifically, the UK's priorities in the region are Brazil, Chile, Uruguay, and the Caribbean. The Caribbean specifically is to help protect its overseas territories. For example, in 2018, the UK opened up 9 diplomatic posts throughout the Caribbean and has 6 bilateral ODA programs. The UK also has a history of supporting disaster relief in the region. For example, responding to hurricanes like Hurricane Irma in 2017, as well as most recently the earthquake in Haiti in 2022. Onto the Middle East, Israel. Israel's relations with the region started basically with the creation of the state in 1948. At first, all or most of its partnerships started centered around agriculture, as well as medical and biotechnology. Since then, the relationship is strengthened significantly and has included things like free trade agreements and becoming a observer state to the Pacific Alliance. Israel is also involved in security in the region, helping Colombia in 2016 mitigate explosive devices used by the FARC. Despite all this, Israel suffered from hits almost, I guess you could say, to its reputation, especially following the Gaza situation. President Milei, for example, has announced public support for it, whereas President Lula da Silva has basically all but condemned Israel, going so far as to call Israel's actions genocide. Next up is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia probably has some of the most recent collaboration with the region. It's mainly centered around oil, especially with Brazil and Guyana, though Saudi Arabia has multiple MOUs with Guyana to help bring like green infrastructure, as well as economic diversification. And finally, Canada. Canada has a very robust presence in the region. It has multiple FTAs with several countries in the region, as well as, like many others, is involved in the mining business, particularly lithium, having dozens of mines. Canada's also heavily focused on cybersecurity, with several projects either currently ongoing or slated to end in the coming years. These projects range from workshops that provide training on things like cybercrime investigations, as well as digital forensics. And something I personally found quite interesting is in regard to Haiti. Canada is the second largest provider of development assistance to Haiti, to the tune of over $1 billion since 2010. Most recently, in February of this year, Canada pledged $60 million to the Kenya-led MSS, which we're all waiting patiently to see how that unfolds. And Leland, back to you for recommendations.
So given all of these different initiatives that our allies and partners have, we came up with 8 policy recommendations for both our US partners, but also our allies and partners to collaborate. The first one is, can we pool resources between our America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity, APEP, and the EU Global Gateway resources? We mentioned at the top that EU President Ursula von der Leyen, she announced a 45 billion euro project to support various renewable energy projects throughout the region. Well, that's really similar to the priorities that APEP has. So instead of kind of having 2 independent initiatives and there's really no collaboration or cooperation between the 2, is there a way in which APEP and Global Gateway can jointly look for projects to fund together, right, and pool resources, whether it be a critical mineral mine or a electric vehicle plant or any sort of renewable energy projects in the region. Connected to this is encouraging Taiwan to play a more active role in APEP, and a core part of APEP is the establishment of this digital center of excellence that is basically going to be housed in Costa Rica. And the idea is that that would be a training hub for people on emerging technology. Think cybersecurity, semiconductor supply chains, quantum, you name it. Well, who's a better partner than Taiwan, who is a leader in all of those, in order to help to support either providing technical assistance or anything in order to really support this digital center of excellence. Third is to convene an annual or biannual interagency working group with our allies and partners in order to really look at all these shared projects and really see whether there's areas of collaboration. I understand that USAID has something similar to this, that you guys already meet with your various counterparts on this, but is there a way that we can also bring in State Department, if we can also bring in DOD, Commerce, and their counterparts throughout, with allies and partners in order to really do this in a more concerted effort. And then fourth is to continue to encourage LAC and Africa engagements. It's one thing for the US or the EU to try to tell partners, hey, don't do business with China, right? Or China is bad. It comes off as lecturing. It comes off as you are better than us and you're sort of talking down at us. It's quite another thing if it's South-led. Last year, we hosted the first ever Africa Americas Forum on China at FIU, where we invited local African experts, local Latin American and Caribbean experts, and for 2 days, they talked to each other to share best practices and talk about pitfalls to potentially avoid in their collaboration with China. It was absolutely incredible. We're going to do it again this year, and hopefully we'll do it year after year. But it's just one example of an array of possibilities in the Africa-Latin America partnership.
Number 5 would be encourage India and Australia to boost their engagement in the region. As India continues to expand and develop, they could quite easily share their expertise that they gain in space, science, agriculture, etc. Australia as well, compared to large economies in the region like Brazil, can easily share their experiences in mitigating economic coercion from other countries like China. Number 6 would be partner with New Zealand on the Eastern Caribbean. The Eastern Caribbean has largely felt like the U.S. has ignored them, and the U.S. could probably quite easily leverage projects that New Zealand's undertaking within the Caribbean and either expand financing and work with them. Number 7 would be coordinate with the EU on engagement in CLAC. Since the U.S. doesn't officially engage in CLAC as it's a counterweight to the OAS, the U.S. should consider working with the EU on CLAC engagements. And finally, number 8, encourage Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other Middle Eastern countries to boost engagement. As I mentioned earlier, Saudi Arabia can provide technical assistance to the region as they're looking to boost their own economy and diversify away from oil. And finally, Israel could support further water management projects in the region, something that it has shown in the past with the desalination plant in Mexico, as well as having multiple agreements with Argentina for water management plans.
So this concludes this portion of our presentation. We're going to hold questions until the very end, but right now we're going to transition to the panel. Now, we were supposed to have 3. We were supposed to have Paul Nantulia of the National National Defense University to focus on sort of Africa-Latin America relations. Unfortunately, he can no longer come, and so you're stuck with me. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
But our 2 other panelists, you can please come up, and we can also have a... You have one?
Let me get you another mic. Well, actually, they're lined up. You're good. Keep this on.
No.
So really quickly, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We first have Veronica Fortin. She's the Director of Western Hemisphere Policy at the Canadian Department of National Defense, where she is responsible for advancing the defense relationship with the U.S. and LAC countries. She has over 17 years of experience in public service, including 10 in the defense and security field. She specializes in operational policy and crisis management and was part of the Canadian Defense Policy Strong, Secure, Engaged writing team. In her free time, she's an avid mountain biker. Next up, we have Leland. You guys already know him, so I'm going to skip him. And finally, we have Diego Aria. He's the Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Latin America Center. He leads initiatives promoting constructive U.S. engagement with Latin America and the Caribbean, managing the center's corporate membership program partnering with Fortune 500 companies. Additionally, he coordinates efforts to engage with U.S. Congress and leads the center's Euro Americas work. He has received recognition such as the GW Guardian of Democracy Award and has participated in the National Endowment for Democracy's Penn Campbell Forum on Democracy Fellowship. Prior to fleeing Venezuela, he served as the Director of Social Development in Caracas, where he spearheaded initiatives like college scholarship programs and violence prevention efforts. So, Veronique, I'm going to kick things off with you. The question I have is, at our annual Hemispheric Security Conference, specifically last year's, we had Sebastian Carrier, the current Chief of Protocol of Canada, who was the prior ambassador to the prior ambassador of Canada to Haiti. And he spoke of Canada's initiatives to bolster the Haitian National Police. Has there been any headway in that effort?
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert. Yeah, there's been a lot of progress actually in the last year from a Canadian perspective. Of course, I say that humbly as I realize that the needs are greater, and also as we're at a critical juncture for both Haiti and the HNP. In terms of support, and thank you so much for highlighting that as well in your report. Canadian support to Haiti is not something that's new. It goes down decades, in fact. And in 2022 alone, Canada spent nearly 300 millions in programs for Haiti. In 2023, that's where we really saw a little boost in terms of security assistance for Haiti. And our prime minister actually announced 100 million, I think it was June, if I'm not mistaken, but June 2023, in terms of support for Haiti and the HNP. And the efforts that have been ongoing are really quite multifaceted as well. First of all, we created and we're leading still to this day the International Security Assistance Cooperation Group, the ISAC-G. So that's led by our Global Affairs Canada, so our Foreign Affairs side of the house, but D&D and also our Canadian Mounted Police, so our National Policing Services are part of this effort as well. And that's really to help coordinate the training and also equipment going from 25 partner nations into 80 and for the HNP. It's a little bit like, if anyone is following what's happening in Ukraine, it's very similar to what SAGU is doing for Ukraine in terms of coordination of support. So Canada is leading that effort. That was quite a big undertaking to pull off, but we're glad that it's now rolling. Also, we have a Royal Canadian Mounted Police that is doing some training for the HNP. And that's very interesting because they really, from the beginning, have engaged with 80 and the HNP to develop the curriculum on specialized policing skills to develop. The training is actually happening in a third country, so it's happening in Jamaica. That started in in December 2023 and is still ongoing at this time. It's episodic, so they bring groups of HNP officers, bring them in Jamaica, provide them with specialized training, and then they go and apply it in the field as well. In terms of support to MSSM, which Robert alluded to. So Minister Jolie, she's the Global Affairs Minister. She was on the margin of the G20 in Brazil, announced 123 million for Haiti. I think it's 60 in US dollars, but it's 80.5 in Canadian dollars, which is going to go to the trust fund for the MSSM. And separately to that, D&D CAF have engaged as well in training of the HNP. Not the HNP, I'm sorry, the CARICOM battalion. So our efforts have really been focused on preparing the CARICOM battalion to deploy on the MSSM. This effort started in January and February of this year when we provided some peace support operation training to around 300 military personnel from Jamaica, Belize, and the Bahamas. And this effort continues this week as we're activating our operational support hub in Jamaica, where we're going to bring Belize and the Bahamas in Jamaica under our wings to really help train them. But this is under the tremendous lead of the Jamaican and the JDF. So very lucky to have them as regional partner on this. In the coming weeks, so we're opening and activating the OSH this week. It should be fully operational by the end of March. And we're providing logistic support as well to bring in the Bahamas and the Belizean in Jamaica. And then after that, we're going to continue with training in terms of like combat first aid, TCCC, and then we're going to move. We also have some planners that are helping the Jamaican lead the validation exercise, and we're going to provide validation support as well throughout the validation exercise, as well as logistic support afterward. So in terms of like what we're doing now, this is kind of what has been happening. There's been a lot of like support, throughout this 100 million that was announced in June of last year. There's a lot of money that has gone to the UN Basket Fund on security. They provide support to the HNP through various projects. We've also given 14 million to the Organization of American States, and that's for their project on community policing as well. So they provide training, equipment, and also they rehabilitate some priority commissariat. And there's just numerous projects that our Global Affairs have been leading, and that D&D and CAF have been supporting in terms of training and security. So I think mainly I would stop it there in terms of like what has been happening on the Haiti side.
So a follow-up question there on Haiti. Is there any specific like equipment requests or anything specific related to that the Haitian National Police say that they need?
Oh yes, of course. There's a long list. They need a lot of equipment, and the list keeps getting longer as well as we move, because obviously in their intensive fight with the gangs, some of their existing equipment gets damaged, and they need more. There's a lot of needs for heavy equipment, lethal equipment, very specialized equipment. Obviously, this is challenging for a lot of the international community because of the arms treaty obligations. So I think that Canada certainly has been looking and monitoring, and there are things that needs to be in place before such support can be provided, in terms of like storage of ammunition and condition that need to be in place. So as of now, we have not been providing lethal support, but this is a space that we continue watching, recognizing, of course, that this is a real need on the HNP part, because they are part of the fight and they are on the front line. So Canadian support has been mainly in terms of like helping building some infrastructure, but there has been some equipment as well, and there are equipments that we are looking to procure as well, especially on our GAC side, because they have the project funding. We're looking at D&D to some surplus donation, and surplus donation I think is a very military term, but basically when we have stuff that we declare surplus that we no longer use but that is still in good order, we can give it to foreign nations. Now there's not a lot of that on the shelf, because if you've been following the news, we've been giving quite a bit to Ukraine, and a lot of our surplus donation has been going to Ukraine as well, in addition to other procurement projects. But we are looking at what's feasible right now to provide to the HNP, as well as potential monies in the new fiscal year to procure some of that equipment as well.
Awesome. Thank you for the very thorough answer. Diego, question I have for you is, how do you see the future of U.S.-Latin America relations evolving, especially in the context of financial cooperation and investment?
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Lilian, and FIU for the invitation. I have to say, I came to this same building a few years ago, and it's incredible what you guys have built here. I came to visit with Carlos Becerra, giving me a tour, and it's just incredible. So kudos to you for having built something so amazing here, and convening all these people, etc. is quite important. One thing I have to confess is, even in the think tank world, we don't read all the reports that are out there from the Atlantic Council, not even of the other organizations as well. We don't have the time, we have a lot going on. But this time I read the report. I did my homework, I read it, and I have to say that it's spot on. And it is spot on because we have to start with the notion that Latin America is not a priority for the U.S. It will not be a priority for the U.S. in the next years. Sadly, there are organizations like the Atlantic Council, like FIU, and like others that spend all our life, our energy, our talent, trying to convince policymakers why you should care about Latin America. What are the potential consequences of Latin America? So by providing this more diverse pool of allies, and then bring them to the table, I think is spot on, and it provides to the U.S. new tools to continue engaging with allies and partners globally to bring them again, to reposition the U.S. In Latin America. And by reading the report, I have to say I share your statement about the U.S. and we're talking about politicians, policymakers, academics, practitioners, analyze Latin America through the U.S.-China strategic competition lens. That's across the board. And the main problem is Latin America is not doing the same. Politicians and policymakers in Latin America with very limited fiscal space are looking for oxygen options to push their agendas, to push their packages, their electoral promises to their audiences that will vote eventually again and they want to get reelected. So they're looking for oxygen, for options to continue delivering in a very challenging economy right now, overall after the pandemic. I had the great opportunity last year of working in a very interesting project. So going from the more academic side to the more practitioner side, we were able, to your question, to build a partnership with the Spanish government within their presidency of the European Commission of the European Union. That gave us kind of a sneak peek of how that crowd think and engages with Latin America. One of the main challenges I could identify, it was very quickly, it was beyond the usual suspects, Portugal, Spain, Italy, maybe Germany. Nobody cares about Latin America. Nobody is thinking about Latin America, how to engage with Latin America. Nobody, to be a little bit more diplomatic, nobody is prioritizing EU-Latin America relations, investment, economic partnerships, etc. So that's a challenge. And we have champions in the region that are trying to position the agenda. Spain managed to do it, I would say, successfully last year, but we need continuity. One of the key words, I think we all share this, is to sustain policies, continuity in the relation. So that would be key. That I see that as one of the main challenges. And when engaging with Spain, they were also sharing that, I would say, concern and frustration. Please, can you guys help us to make a business case to other European counterparts to get more involved in this, to vote with us, to commit resources to these cool initiatives we want to put together during our presidency? So I would say that's one very important challenge there. The second big challenge, and I don't know if we have a solution for this, I'm from Latin America, I came here only 7 years ago, is the lack of regional integration within Latin America. Because Europe then can't go and say, okay, Latin America, how are you? Let's build this huge project together. They have to go country by country with different regulations, with supply chains that don't speak to each other, and all the challenges that come with it. So that's a huge challenge for Europe, Latin America regional cooperation and integration. There are steps taken by multilateral organizations and others to try to push that agenda, but it will take years, decades to build something tangible that make Latin America a more competitive place for investments from these locations. I would say the third, and this is happening as we speak, are the political shifts both in Europe that will occur in Europe, in the European Parliament during the summer, but also elections in Latin America and in the US as well. So how those changes, those new policymakers would see Latin America, what would be the approach? It would be a climate base, or it would be more energy security. When speaking with our counterparts in Europe, it looks like there is a wave to the right. It is expected the European Parliament to shift to lean to the right. So would that change their prioritization of Latin America? Would that change the policies they want to prioritize when engaging with Latin America? That presents a challenge. And I would say the biggest, largest elephant in the room is the EU-Mercosur free trade agreement. Is such a complex political issue that will bring so many resources and opportunities for the entire Mercosur community and Europe, but it has become a political domestic issue in France, in Brazil, in Europe. So there is, I would say, no much political space for an initiative like this that would create huge impact to advance. And then there are also opportunities. Not everything is an issue in Latin America. Veronique and I were speaking about it. The region has vast resources, vast opportunities to offer to the global north as well. And we see, and I will tell this through the story of Spain. Spain presided the European Commission of the European Union last year, and then we saw Latin America appearing in dialogues, appearing in initiatives. We saw resources funneled to develop Latin America around three main priorities: democracy, building democracy, value-based relationship, and the twin transitions, digital and green transition. Leland, by the way, what a cool screen you have here, guys. Leland went through a few of these key flagship initiatives, but I'm going to repeat some of them. First, the Ibero-American Summit in the Dominican Republic. I mean, we're talking about thousands of companies, policymakers from across the hemisphere, talking about building projects, partnering, discussing what are the opportunities for engagement. That is important. That doesn't happen very often. Then secondly, the EU-LAC Summit. After an 8-year hiatus, it was celebrated in Brussels. It was a little bit, I would say, polemic on one hand, because Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba attended the summit, as opposed to the Summit of the Americas that they weren't invited. They even co-signed, two of those countries co-signed the resulting statement. Nicaragua abstained. But I would say having all those leaders from Latin America and Europe sitting down and talking about shared priorities is not something that you see very often. And as a result of that, and Leland also mentioned this, the Global Gateway Investment Agenda was announced with $45 billion of investments in infrastructure, digital, green, etc. Maybe to conclude on this space, the U.S. And where is the U.S.? Where is the U.S. is there a triangle, a potential triangle here, or we need to live with a EU-LAC relation and then separate America's relationship? Let's add Canada to our relationship. I would say there are opportunities there for the U.S. to engage more intentionally European counterparts, and as the report said, and we had discussed here, try to align priorities. We both want to promote more access in the digital space. Why don't we combine forces, combine resources? I know there are politics. We all want to be the person in the screen who says, we're announcing this amount of money. All that plays in the game, but we have the opportunity, the Latin Americanists, we all have the opportunity to push towards that agenda. So I think, again, these initiatives and all the conversations that lead to a more, I would say, robust U.S. foreign policy and global foreign assistance and partnerships with Latin America, it will flourish, because Latin America is the land of opportunities. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you, Diego. Leland, what lessons can Latin America and the Caribbean learn from African nation experiences, Chinese investment and partnerships?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, a word that kept on coming up from the Africa Americas Forum that we had in October of last year was the word agency. That whether it be African countries or Latin American and Caribbean countries, they want to have the agency to be able to choose who their partners are, to be able to leverage both investment from China and the US, and they do not want to be forced to choose in some sort of new Cold War structure. And so, we heard actually quite positive things about Chinese engagement in both regions. For the U.S. folks in the audience, I'm sorry to tell you, but for example, there was one very poignant statement from one of the Africa representatives, and she mentioned how China is one of the largest funders of green energy and climate change projects, right? There's the China-Africa Climate Cooperation Fund, right? Or for Latin America and the Caribbean, you're seeing sort of a shift in the Belt and Road projects, right? There's sort of a Belt and Road 2.0. I want to give a shout out to sort of my intellectual mentor or mother, if you will, Margaret Myers over at the Inter-American Dialogue. She recently came out with a report on Chinese new infrastructure in Latin America and the Caribbean, right? So you're going to see less of these big ticket mega projects, even though you will have some here and there. The port of Chancay in Peru is a perfect example of that. But you're going to see more of a targeted, Xi Jinping has called it Xiao'ermei, which is a small but beautiful, right? Smaller but beautiful projects that are more targeted on renewable energy, critical minerals, 5G and telecommunications, right? Those are going to be the more targeted projects that BRI will focus on in the future. So that's one, agency. Another one is really recognizing who the players are. What do I mean by that? When we talk about Chinese engagement in Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa, it's not just China as a behemoth. I mean, there's actually state-owned enterprises who are focusing on projects in different regions, right? Some of them are good, relatively. Some of them have engaged in, trends of corruption and environmental damage and labor violation and undue delays. And so if I'm a Latin American country and I see a China civil engineering company or a China harbor engineering company bidding on a project, well, you can look to your African brother and sister to say, hey, ECC, or Czech, what was their performance in your country? All right? I'll give you a specific example. In Nigeria, China civil engineering company, specifically the executive there, Lee Ching-yong, he's been implicated in various corruption scandals and basically inflating the contract payment. Well, this same guy is now the head of ECC in Peru, and we're seeing some of the same corruption allegations and issues happening in Peru right now, right? So really identifying who are those players, who are the good ones, who are the ones to avoid in engaging in various infrastructure projects. And third is an increase in Chinese engagement in law enforcement. Both Latin America and the Caribbean, have, of course, an issue in terms of security. I think security is a huge issue, especially in a year with so many elections going on in Latin America and the Caribbean, right? That's a huge issue from crime going on in Argentina, Buenos Aires, and other cities. Ecuador, right, which has become a huge issue, right, with the prison breaks and everything like that, and Daniel Noboa basically trying to use the Nayib Bukele model in order to try to deal with that. But you see a massive increase of demand in technology in order to deal with that kind of law enforcement issue. And so again, you're seeing some of the same players, Huawei, ZTE, Dahua, Hikvision, that are providing safe city, smart city surveillance technology to various countries, both in Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. You're seeing the Ministry of Public Security donating helmets, batons, anti-bullet vests to various national police, both in Nigeria and in Ethiopia, but also in Honduras and also in Nicaragua, right? So I think you're going to see that kind of increase over time in both regions, and I think that those are definitely areas in which they can learn from each other.
Awesome. Before I ask any more questions to the panel, does anybody in the audience have any questions?
Are we allowed to ask after?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, okay. I'll just wait till after. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andres Ayala. I'm a senior at FIU studying economics and computer science. So you guys have mentioned around the Israeli-Palestine conflict. How do you think that would impact the relationship with Israel and other countries? I know you mentioned Israel and Colombia. How would you think that would impact more on Colombia rather than Israel?
Say it again for me.
So that with the conflict that's going on, there's been a lot of kind of relationships that have been kind of shattered. So Spain did cut off ties with Israel over the conflict, but also Colombia has also been very critical of Israel. How would you think that would impact more Colombia than Israel?
Well, so I believe Colombia has recalled their ambassador to Israel already. Beyond that, I'm not an expert, so I mean, unless maybe Diego, you might possibly know.
I can take it. I think it's mainly ideological. I think in the case of, there are different cases, right? Petro is sending a message, is sending an internal message to his base. I personally fear, and this I'm diverging from the main theme we were discussing today, but that's okay. I fear that if President Petro is not able to advance any of his reforms, he's already talking about constituent assembly, and he's proposing some measures that can erode the democratic institutions. He has been always vocal about his ideological stance, so I would say it's more ideological. It's more, I can imagine Petro sitting in his desk and ranting about Israel, watching news, and then tweeting without asking any of his advisors, right? There are economic consequences, potential economic consequences on the security side for Colombia because they have cooperation, and Israel will play depending on the escalation of the conversation. On the Lula side, Lula is playing more I am a global leader kind of role. I want to become one. If I'm not one, I want to build legacy. I think he made I would say a diplomatic mistake. The Brazilian Itamaraty is globally known as I would say an example of a good diplomatic body. However, Lula is Lula, and Lula wants to make news, and that's important, and that also speaks to his base. So beyond that, I don't see any further implications or consequences for both economies. That's my take. Anyone else?
I'll just add a couple more, which is that in our study we also found that Israel provides not that much, but also provides some funding for cybersecurity training throughout Latin America and the Caribbean through the OAS, right? And Israel also supports various like water management and irrigation projects in Argentina, for example. You see how President Milei, one of the first countries that he visited was Israel. One, because he's studying to become Jewish, right?
I think he converted.
Yeah. And of the hostages in Gaza, some of them are dual citizens, right? Argentine and Israeli citizens. So Israel does play a significant role, but of course, it is causing, as you mentioned before, this ideological split on who's in support and who's not.
Maybe another another interesting angle to your question, Andres, is how would that affect U.S. relations with Colombia? That's another conversation, right? Or how the escalation of the Israel-Hamas conflict could affect the resources that the U.S. is investing in the region, the attention, etc. That can definitely and is affecting the resources. The resources are limited, and the government needs to shift priorities. Israel-Hamas is the priority. It has been prioritized over the Russia's invasion to Ukraine. So in terms of resources, international cooperation, it can affect the relationship, and it will definitely affect the bilateral diplomatic relationship U.S.-Colombia, U.S.-Brazil, if the rhetoric continues escalating. That's my take.
I did see a few other hands. Do you have them?
Sure, I can just ask the question now then. So, thank you so much for the panel. First off, I wanted to introduce myself first. My name is Mia Rodriguez. My preferred pronouns are they, them, theirs. And a little bit about what I study. I'm just going to summarize it really quick because it's a bit of a mouthful. Politics, Asian studies, IR, law, all different concentrations. But what I wanted to ask you guys is actually a question surrounding what actually got me here in the fly-in. During my time as an FIU student, I actually took analytical writing and political science under Yvette Woolley. Yvette Woolley was someone who worked in intelligence under 3 presidents, including Barack Obama. So she had a wonderful disposition and taught me a lot about how I could look at national security. Something that I looked into my national security was essentially what was going on with Russia, Ukraine, with Kishida, Zelensky, but also Xi and Putin, and how they had talks at the exact same time. The reason why that matters is because in my research, it's in relation to like U.S. and what they can do with Latin America, but China's role in it. China, based on this evidence last year, so you guys have anything new, I would love to hear. China has been rumored to be kind of taking the spot of the U.S. as the peacemaker. They saw how, like, for years, like, the U.S. was trying to facilitate conflicts in Latin America, be more active in the United Nations. So it's rumored that even though there's Chinese spy balloons and that China wants to be more of a facilitator for what is happening in Russia or Ukraine, they also were trying to have Putin use the yuan when investing in Latin America. So in reference to the US and Latin America, and the whole point of this presentation being leveraging partnerships, how can the US likely leverage partnerships even though their opponents, such as China, is actually catching up on the downfall of the US's reputation? Thank you. I hope that made sense.
They should read the report. Anyone else wants to?
Sure. It's a tough question, of course. How can we leverage? I think, there has to be a recognition that in terms of economic support, like, I don't think, certainly from a Canadian and like in discussion with, U.S. official as well, there is a recognition that it would be hard to catch. It would be hard to, to follow suit because we don't have the same, funding to support. So after that, it's all about finding what's your value added, right? It's all about finding those niche area where you can really make a difference. And, in talking with our partners, certainly from a defense standpoint, as Diego said, like, they're pragmatic. They will go where the money is, and it's nothing against the West. It's nothing against Canada. It's nothing against the U.S. It's purely by necessity. But there is still, I think, on the defense side, at least, a desire to remain more aligned with the West, I believe. And then after that, it's all about what we can do to maintain this desire. Not great solution because, like the U.S. and like I think this is true at DoD, and I think it's not a secret. It's in I think the priorities are out publicly, but it's the same certainly on the Canadian side. Like Latin America and the Caribbean is not the priority region. It's challenging when there are so many priorities and conflicts around the world. A lot of efforts are going in Indo-Pacific, in Middle East, and in Europe, of course, with Ukraine. So what's left after? So we're at this juncture where we have to be creative. And I think this is going to bring the conversation later as well, especially on the recommendation. But I think more than ever now, there is this recognition that we need to work together to make this sustainable. So in terms of, and as Diego said, like we need to look for opportunities. And I think that's one of those. We really have to rally together and like find ways to, it's not maintaining a competitive advantage because I think this, I think this is back now. This is behind us. But it's about maintaining the shared values and those conversations. So this is where we're at.
Wow, thank you. That was really insightful.
I would like to add two quick ideas. The first one, again, go back to the report, is US, hey guys, go like sit down with Canada, see what you guys can do together, how can you join forces? Why don't you bring Australia to the conversation? What about Japan? What about others? Like I like that I'm saying before I should that my favorite recommendation is please convene all these people, constructive actors, allies and partners. Why don't we start working together towards that? And secondly, and I think this is the most important one, we do have a competitive advantage. We have we share values. We share perspectives of life. We share the philosophy of our life. We see each other and we can see similarities. With China is a more challenging. That process becomes more challenging. We have been working on a project helping Latin American policymakers on the local and federal level to navigate China. It's not, please do not receive money from China because they all see you like, what are you talking about? Is when receiving money, when partnering with China, make sure you do not do A, B, Z, D, E. This is the script they apply. This is how this affects your country. Cover yourself, be nimble in the way you engage with us.
All right, so we're pretty low on time right now, so I'm just going to ask my final question to each of you guys. Of our policy reports recommendations, which ones do you think would be the most feasible or important to try to follow up on?
And I think it's going to be a short answer because Diego already mentioned, and I do think similarly that convening, an annual or biannual meeting across agencies, and I think that's the key here because if you look at defense, these discussions are already occurring amongst partners and allies and regional partners as well. But what we see less is that interagency discussion. And I think that's crucial, exactly to identify what are our competitive advantage. And also, I really like how you brought in the report the concept of integrated deterrence, because I think this linked very well with this recommendation as well. So I think for me, this is the most viable, but I'm a little bit biased, of course, because all the rest of the recommendation are a bit more less focused on defense. So this is the one that makes the most sense from my sphere. But I'm glad to see that Diego thinks the same.
We definitely agree, Veronique, on that one. Maybe the second one that I would mention is this idea on in the US engaging more on the EU LAC summit and engagements. And I would add maybe something for us to keep in mind. Next year should be celebrated the next EU LAC summit in Colombia. And the same year, the Summit of the Americas will happen in the Dominican Republic around the same date. What if the US and Europe, in coordination, try to find a bridge of communication between the two conversations? I do understand, and it is well illustrated in your report, that there are some political sensitivities between the OAS and CELAC. Definitely there are, but by connecting the outcomes, the priorities of both summits, maybe we will be talking about something interesting moving forward.
In the effort to just choose something different, probably the Taiwan piece. We mentioned Taiwan before, and I mentioned the recent trip that we took over to Taipei, and I had the opportunity to interview the they're basically their Ministry of Foreign Affairs Department for Latin America and Caribbean affairs. So really to hear from them, how are they approaching the region? What's their projects and initiatives? And you heard a very rosy picture from their MOFA, but then a very different picture from their Ministry of Trade. So let me start with the rosy. You know, again, they highlighted ICDF programs, OIDC programs, the increase in exports. But the representative from the Ministry of Trade, who has spent many years living in Mexico and Guatemala and Brazil, he said it was always pulling teeth trying to get Taiwanese private companies to invest in this region. Why? Because of the simple tyranny of distance, right? Why would any Taiwanese company set up shop in Guatemala or St. Lucia or St. Vincent and the Grenadines when the cost of labor is a little bit, but still lower in Cambodia or in Indonesia or Vietnam, right? And it also makes more sense since Taiwan has the new southbound policy, right? They want to focus on diversifying their supply chains in Southeast Asia. So it just makes more economic sense to just focus there instead of Latin America and the Caribbean. That was a huge wake-up call, because I felt like sort of a lot of the things that I was writing and some other colleagues who focus on China, Latin America, we were just saying, well, it's a no-brainer to just try to get more Taiwanese investment in the region, but that's the hard reality, right? But I do want to come back to the idea of this digital center of excellence that's being built in Costa Rica. I mean, if we can somehow encourage TSMC, UMC, right? MediaTek, which we visited, right? A semiconductor design company. Maybe they're not going to set up the most advanced semiconductor factories or fabs in Latin America and the Caribbean, but maybe some legacy ones, right? Not the 2 or 3 nanometer ones, but maybe the 14 or the 28 nanometer ones. It's definitely ones that are needed for automobiles, right? And I understand that an interesting point was that TSMC is building a multi-billion-dollar plant in Arizona, right? Everybody's following that. Well, various component companies from Taiwan are actually setting up along the Arizona-Mexico border in anticipation of that. One of them is building like printed circuit boards, so think like that green little thing that you put the semiconductors on. Well, they're setting up shop in Mexico like right now, right? Or a delegation of Taiwanese chip companies, they came to Mexico looking for investment opportunities. So if there's more of that, I think it can go a long way in not only just boosting economic engagement in the region, but also fighting back against that narrative that Taiwan getting from 12 to 0 is somehow inevitable, right? It is not inevitable. Taiwan just really needs to tell the world its importance to the global economy.
All right, well, thank you guys. That's the end of the moderation section. Carlos, if you want to come up and close us out.
Jenny, hi, Prachi. Oh, she's a celebrity. I want to thank our panel. I think you represent a cross-section on behalf of FIU, the larger FIU, great collaboration that we enjoy with other countries and the Atlantic Council for sure. I want to salute Robert and Leland on behalf of with the Gordon Institute. Has from day one has been a partner of what we're doing here in Washington, and it's not every night that I can say I've actually known the moderator since he was born. But tonight I can say I've actually known the moderator since he was born. That's another story. Yeah. But I want to welcome you all. I think by looks of faces, I think this might be the first time that many of you will be visiting. Welcome to FIU in DC, our home away from home from Miami, but we're all about our neighbors and our partners utilizing the space. I see Adrian Ross, who's been a great collaborator over the years. The bar is open for another 20-ish, 25 minutes, so please enjoy, continue the discussion, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. much for your
Yeah. So to your
turn your magic on. With me, she'd say everything you want to dream away. We are legends every day. That's what she told